I woke up to the sound of a suitcase zipper cutting through the early morning silence. My eyes struggled to focus in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. The clock on my nightstand glowed 6:15 a.m. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Emmett stood at the foot of our bed, methodically folding shirts and placing them into an open suitcase, with movements that seemed almost violent in their precision. "What are you doing?" My voice came out rough with sleep. He didn't look at me, just kept folding, his jaw tight. "I'm going to Marcus's place for a few days." I sat up slowly, my heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with being startled awake. Marcus's place? Why? "I need space." He finally glanced at me, and his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Distance. "I need space to think about our relationship, about whether this is really what I want." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of our bedroom. "Whether what is what you want? Us?" He gestured vaguely at the room, at me, at the 7 years of marriage contained in furniture and framed photos and the life we'd built together. "You're a great person, Cora. You really are. But my friends have been asking questions." "Questions about what?" "About why I'm with someone who doesn't really have ambitions." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Someone who's just comfortable." Not impressive. The word landed like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching somewhere between my lungs and my throat. He zipped the suitcase with a sharp final sound. "Sienna said something last night that really stuck with me. We were all out at dinner, and she said I was too remarkable to be with someone unremarkable." He lifted the suitcase off the bed, "And I think she's right." I watched him move toward the door. This man I'd loved for 9 years, married for 7. This man whose rent I'd paid when he was unemployed, whose career I'd quietly funded, whose ego I'd protected by making myself smaller. "So I'm going to take some time," he continued, his hand on the doorknob. "Figure out if I want to stay in this marriage, or if I want to find someone more aligned with where my life is going." He turned to leave, probably expecting tears, probably expecting me to beg him to stay, to promise I'd be more impressive, more ambitious, more whatever he needed me to be. Instead, I said something that surprised us both. "Before you go, I need to tell you something about my work, about what I've actually been doing for the last 3 years while you thought I was just comfortable and unremarkable." He set down the suitcase with an annoyed sigh. "Cora, this really isn't the time." "My company was just acquired for $21 million. I kept my voice steady, watching his face. "My share is 12.7 million. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. "So yes," I continued, "take your time at Marcus's place. Think about whether you want to find someone more impressive. And while you're doing that, I'll be planning something special for your birthday next week. Don't worry. You and all your friends are invited." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Oh, and Emmett?" I pulled back the covers and stood up. "The apartment lease is in my name, so take all the time you need. Just not here." I walked past him to the bathroom and closed the door. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. But for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't making myself smaller. I was done disappearing. When I came out 10 minutes later, he was still standing in the bedroom doorway, his suitcase on the floor beside him, his face the color of old paper. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "You don't have a company. You do freelance consulting from the apartment." "I do crisis management consulting," I corrected him, "for tech companies, data breaches, PR nightmares, executive scandals, the kind of disasters other firms won't touch." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. "This is from Catalyst Ventures. The acquisition closed yesterday. Would you like to read the wire transfer confirmation?" He didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, just stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a language he'd never heard before. "My business partner's name is Maya Chin," I said. "We started the firm 3 years ago. Right around the time you got that promotion you were so proud of, remember? You came home talking about your new title, your raise, how you'd finally made it. His face flickered with recognition. I was happy for you, I continued. I made your favorite dinner. I listened to you talk about your success for 2 hours. I never mentioned that I'd just signed my first seven-figure client that same week. Why? The word came out strangled. Why wouldn't you tell me? I thought about that question so many times over the past 3 years. Rehearsed different answers in my head during long nights when Emmett slept peacefully beside me, unaware of the empire I was building in secret. Because you were so proud of being the successful one, I said finally. The breadwinner, the remarkable husband with the supportive wife. And I actually thought, that letting you have that narrative was what a good wife did, that making myself smaller so you could feel bigger was love. I walked to my closet and pulled out the black dress I'd bought last week. Simple, expensive, the kind that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. I supported you for 2 years after you finished grad school, I said, keeping my voice level. While you were interning at firms that paid nothing. I paid our rent, I paid our bills. I never mentioned it because I thought, that's what partners did. Emmett was still standing frozen in the doorway, his suitcase forgotten. Last year, when your firm restructured and cut your salary by 30%, I covered the shortfall. I laid the dress on the bed. You were embarrassed, so I didn't make a big deal about it. Just quietly transferred money from my business account to our joint account so you wouldn't have to worry. His face had gone from pale to gray. The Tesla you've been test driving every weekend? I pulled out matching shoes. I made a down payment last week, $20,000. It was going to be a surprise for your birthday. Cora, the apartment we live in, I continued, my voice getting stronger now. The lease is in my name, has been since before we got married. You moved in with me, not the other way around. The furniture, the art on the walls, the car you drive. I bought all of it. Not because I was keeping score, but because I thought we were building a life together. I thought we were partners. I didn't know, he whispered. No, you didn't, because you never asked. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, years of suppressed frustration finally finding their edge. In 7 years of marriage, you never once asked me what I was really working on, what I cared about, what I was building. You just assumed I was there to support your career, your dreams, your ambitions. The unremarkable wife with the remarkable husband. I walked past him into the bathroom and started getting ready for the day. Through the mirror, I could see him still standing there, trying to process information that didn't fit the story he'd been telling himself about our life. I met you 9 years ago, I said, brushing my teeth, at that coffee shop in Portland. You were a grad student with big dreams about changing the world through architecture. You had this way of talking about buildings like they were living things. I fell hard. I rinsed and set down the toothbrush. We got married at my parents' vineyard in Napa. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. I wore my grandmother's dress. You cried during your vows. You promised to see me, really see me, for the rest of our lives. The memory sat between us, heavy with irony. For the first few years, I thought you did see me, I continued. I thought we were happy. I worked my freelance consulting jobs, contributed to bills, supported your career, made your favorite meals, went to your work events, smiled at your colleagues, listened to you talk about your projects for hours. I met his eyes in the mirror. I was very good at being the woman in the background, the steady presence that required no attention. I thought that's what you wanted, Emmett said quietly. I shouldn't have had to say it. I turned to face him directly. You should have asked. In 7 years, you should have wondered at least once if there was more to me than what you could see on the surface. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed or confused. I don't understand. You had all this success, this company, this money. Why did you hide it? Why did you let me think that you were remarkable and I was unremarkable? I finished for him. Because I thought you needed to be the successful one. I thought that's what you wanted. I paused, surprised by the realization even as I said it out loud. And maybe I was testing you, seeing if you'd love me when you thought I was ordinary. when there was nothing impressive about me to reflect well on you. The test results were in. He'd failed spectacularly. You said Sienna told you I was unremarkable, I said. When was that conversation? Last night, at dinner. He looked uncomfortable now. A bunch of us went out after work. Marcus, Devin, Harper, Sienna. We were talking about relationships, careers, life stuff. And Sienna, she didn't mean it in a bad way. She just said she thought I could probably do better, that I was too accomplished to be with someone who didn't have the same level of ambition. And you agreed with her. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. I thought she had a point. I nodded slowly. So this morning you woke up and decided to pack a bag. Go to Marcus's place. Think about whether you wanted to stay married to your unremarkable wife. When you say it like that, how should I say it, Emmett? I walked back into the bedroom and started making the bed with sharp, precise movements. You were leaving me, not with conversation or honesty or any attempt to work through whatever you were feeling. You were just packing a suitcase and walking out at 6 in the morning so you could avoid the mess of an actual breakup. He winced. I was going to call you later. Explain everything properly. How generous. I smoothed the comforter, fluffed the pillows. Well, you don't have to call now. You can explain everything properly right here. Tell me exactly what made you think I was unremarkable. I'm genuinely curious. Emmett shifted his weight, deeply uncomfortable now. It's not that you're unremarkable. It's just, you don't have ambitions. You work from home. You don't have a title or a career path or a 7-figure income or… He stopped. Or a multi-million-dollar company, I said. Or clients in 6 countries. Or acquisition offers from Fortune 500 companies. Which part of that sounds unambitious to you? I didn't know about any of that. Because you never asked. I repeated it, letting it sink in. 7 years, Emmett. You never asked. The morning light was getting stronger now, casting long shadows across our bedroom floor. Somewhere outside, I could hear traffic building, the city waking up, people starting their ordinary days with their ordinary problems. My problem was no longer ordinary. I want you to go to Marcus's place, I said finally. I want you to take your time thinking about whether I'm remarkable enough for you. And while you're doing that, I'm going to be doing something too. What? Planning your birthday party. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. You said your friends are all invited, right? Marcus, Devin, Harper, Sienna, the ones who think I'm so unremarkable. He nodded slowly, wary now. Good, because I already have a reservation at L'Atelier Rousseau for your birthday. I made it 4 months ago. Michelin-starred restaurant, 3-month waitlist, the works. I was going to surprise you with a private dinner, just the two of us. I grabbed my laptop bag from the desk. But I think I'm going to modify the reservation. Make it a group event, something memorable. Cora, what are you planning? I'm planning to give you and your friends exactly what you want, I said. The truth about who I really am. No more hiding, no more being unremarkable. I walked to the bedroom door, then paused and looked back at him. The apartment lease is in my name, like I said. So take your suitcase and go to Marcus's place. Take a week, take 2 weeks, take however long you need to decide if you want to find someone more impressive than me. I opened the door. But Emmett, don't miss your birthday dinner. I promise it's going to be unforgettable. I left him standing there in our bedroom, his suitcase still on the floor, his whole world tilting on an axis he hadn't known existed. The drive to Maya's apartment felt surreal. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to process what had just happened. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing through 7 years of marriage, seeing it all with new clarity now. Every time I'd made myself smaller, every time I'd stayed quiet about my success, every time I'd let Emmett believe he was the impressive one. Maya lived in the Mission District, 3rd floor of a converted Victorian with original hardwood floors and bay windows that caught the morning light. I'd barely knocked when she opened the door, already dressed, coffee already made, like she'd been expecting me. Tell me everything, she said, pulling me inside. I collapsed onto her couch and told her about the suitcase, about Emmett's speech, about Sienna and the dinner conversation that had convinced him I was unremarkable. I told her about revealing the acquisition, about the look on his face when he realized his unremarkable wife was worth $12.7 million. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger, to something that looked almost like vindication. 3 years, she said when I finished. 3 years you've been hiding what we built because you were afraid of how he'd react. I wasn't afraid. Yes, you were. She set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. You were terrified he'd feel diminished, that he'd be threatened, that he wouldn't be able to handle having a wife who was more successful than him. She leaned forward. And guess what? You were right. The second his friends questioned whether you were remarkable enough, he started packing a suitcase. The words stung because they were true. Maya and I had met in college, freshman year, randomly assigned as roommates in a dorm that smelled like old carpet and ambition. She'd been studying computer science. I'd been studying business management. We'd stayed up late talking about the companies we'd build someday, the impact we'd make, the way we'd change industries that desperately needed changing. After graduation, we'd gone separate ways for a few years. She'd worked at a tech startup in Austin. I'd done consulting for various firms in San Francisco, but we'd stayed close, talking every week, sharing ideas, watching each other's careers develop. Then 3 years ago, over drinks at a wine bar in North Beach, Maya had pitched me an idea. Crisis management for tech companies, she'd said. But not the corporate BS kind, the real kind. When a company has a data breach and millions of customer records get exposed, when an executive gets caught doing something awful and the board needs damage control, when everything is on fire and the traditional PR firms are too scared to touch it. I'd been intrigued immediately. Why us? Because we're good at putting out fires, because we understand tech, and because no one expects two women to walk into a room and fix what their overpaid consultants couldn't. She'd grinned. Also, we'd make a fortune. She hadn't been wrong. We'd started small. Maya handled the technical side, understanding the systems, the breaches, the vulnerabilities. I handled the people side, the executives, the boards, the carefully crafted statements that acknowledged problems without creating legal liability. Our first client had been a mid-sized fintech company that had exposed 3 million users' financial data through a coding error. They'd hired us out of desperation after 2 other firms had turned them down. We'd fixed it in 6 weeks, contained the PR damage, implemented new security protocols, turned a catastrophe into a case study in responsible crisis response. Word spread fast in the insular world of tech executives. By the end of year 1, we'd billed $800,000. By the end of year 2, $2.3 million. Last year, $4.2 million. We were expensive. We were discreet. And we were devastatingly effective at saving reputations and careers when everything was falling apart. 6 months ago, 2 Fortune 500 companies had approached us about acquisition. They wanted our methods, our client list, our expertise. But most of all, they wanted us. The offers had been staggering, the kind of numbers that made my accountant develop a nervous tic when he showed me the projections. But both offers came with the same condition. We had to go public. Our LLC structure had kept our names hidden, offering anonymity to clients who value discretion above everything else. But if we wanted 8-figure payouts, we needed to become the public faces of what we'd built. I'd hesitated for months, told Maya I needed more time, that I wasn't ready, that going public would complicate things at home. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. I was afraid of how Emmett would react. I should have told him years ago, I said now, staring into my coffee. When we first started making real money, when we landed our first 7-figure client, I should have just been honest. Why weren't you? Maya asked gently. I thought about that, really thought about it. Because he was so proud of being the successful one, I said. The breadwinner. Every time we went to a party or a work event, he'd introduce me as his wife who does some freelance consulting. Then he'd spend 20 minutes talking about his latest architectural project. And I'd stand there smiling, nodding, playing the supportive wife. I set down my cup. I told myself I was being kind, letting him have the spotlight, not making it a competition. But it wasn't kindness. It was enabling, Maya said. I know that now. She pulled out her laptop and opened it on the coffee table between us. So here's where we are. Catalyst Ventures is ready to close the deal. 21 million for 60% of the company. Your share after splitting, 12.7 million. Mine the same. We stay on as executive partners. Full control of operations. 5-year commitment. The number still didn't feel real. The press release is drafted, Maya continued. Jordan McNulty is handling PR. He's coordinated with TechCrunch, Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, all the major business outlets. The story goes live the night of Emmett's birthday. She glanced at me. Ashford Chin Crisis Management acquired by Catalyst Ventures. 2 women built an 8-figure company while everyone was looking the other way. That's the angle Jordan wants to lead with. The invisible founders. The women who built something extraordinary while staying completely under the radar. It's a good story, I said. It's a great story. People are going to eat it up. She closed her laptop. But Cora, I need you to understand something. Once you're visible, you can't go back to invisible. People will have opinions about you, about your business, about your marriage. They'll dissect your life on social media. Are you ready for that? I thought about the last 7 years, about introducing myself as Emmett's wife at parties and watching people's eyes glaze over with disinterest the moment they learned I just did some consulting, about being remarkable in secret because I was afraid of what visibility would cost. I'm ready, I said. That afternoon, I went home and pulled out every piece of documentation I'd been maintaining for the past 3 years. Partnership agreements with Maya, client contracts with NDAs and confidentiality clauses, bank statements showing wire transfers and quarterly earnings, tax returns that told a story Emmett had never bothered to read. I'd been supporting us financially for the last 18 months, ever since his architecture firm had gone through restructuring and cut his salary by 30%. He'd been embarrassed, angry at himself, worried about money. I'd quietly transferred funds from my business account to our joint account, covering the difference so seamlessly he'd never noticed. The apartment we lived in, my name was the only one on the lease. I'd bought it 5 years ago, before we got married, back when I was still freelancing and saving aggressively. Emmett had moved in after the wedding. We'd never bothered changing the paperwork. The furniture, the art on the walls, the expensive coffee maker he used every morning. I'd bought all of it, not because I was keeping score, but because I'd had the money and he'd had student loans he was still paying down. The car he drove, the laptop he used for work, the tailored suits that photographed well at client meetings, all of it funded by the unremarkable wife doing her freelance consulting from home. I made copies of everything, organized it chronologically, created a simple presentation with clean slides and undeniable numbers. Then I pulled up the folder I'd labeled Support 2 years ago, when Emmett had graduated and started looking for work. 2 years of rent payments while he interned at firms that paid nothing but promised experience. The $15,000 I'd loaned him for professional camera equipment, high-end gear for architectural photography that would make his portfolio stand out. He'd promised to pay me back when he got his first real paycheck. That was 4 years ago. We'd never discussed it again. The $8,000 website redesign by a professional developer who'd made Emmett's online portfolio look slick and sophisticated. The $3,000 I'd spent on his membership to the American Institute of Architects. The countless dinners and client lunches I'd funded while he was networking and building connections. I'd never thought of it as keeping score. I thought of it as partnership, as investment in our shared future, as the invisible work that held relationships and households together. But looking at the numbers now, spread across my desk in neat columns of debits and credits, I realized I'd been subsidizing more than his career. I'd been subsidizing his ego, funding the fiction that he was the successful one, the remarkable one, the generous husband who'd been kind enough to marry someone ordinary. My phone buzzed, a text from Emmett. Can we talk? I've been thinking about what you said. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, not yet. Enjoy your time at Marcus's place. We'll talk at your birthday dinner. Another buzz, almost immediate. About that, maybe we should cancel the dinner. Keep this between us. I smiled at the screen. He was starting to understand that something was coming, starting to feel the first tremors of the earthquake I was about to trigger. No, I typed back. Your friends were instrumental in helping you see how unremarkable I am. They deserve to be there when you find someone better. Dinner is still on, Saturday, 8 p.m., L'Atelier Rousseau. Don't be late. I silenced my phone and went back to my documentation. 3 days until the board meeting to finalize the acquisition. 10 days until Emmett's birthday. 10 days until everyone who'd ever called me unremarkable learned exactly what they'd been too blind to see. Over the next week, Emmett's texts came in waves, 19 messages, each one revealing exactly how little he understood about what had broken between us. Day 1 was anger. You're being completely irrational about this. I was just being honest. That's what we're supposed to do in a marriage. Day 2 shifted to confusion. I don't understand why you're shutting me out. Can we at least talk like adults? This silent treatment is childish. By day 3, he'd moved to conciliation. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Work has been intense, and my friends were just trying to help me process. Can we please just sit down and talk this through? I responded to exactly 0 messages. In my crisis management work, I learned that silence was often more devastating than confrontation. When companies face scandals, the worst thing they could do was engage in back and forth with critics. It gave the story oxygen, kept it alive, allowed the narrative to spiral in unpredictable directions. Better to go quiet. Let the other side fill the vacuum with their own fears and projections. Let them imagine the worst possible scenarios. I could feel Emmett starting to panic by day 5. Please, Cora, just tell me what I can do to fix this. I know I messed up. I know I said something hurtful. But we've been together 7 years. That has to count for something. Please. Day 6. Marcus says I should give you space, but I can't just sit here not knowing what you're thinking. Are you planning to leave me? Are you talking to a lawyer? Please just tell me what's happening. The mention of a lawyer was interesting. He was starting to understand this wasn't a fight. This was something else. Day 7. I drove by the apartment today. Your car was there, but you didn't answer when I knocked. I know you're home. I know you can hear me. This isn't fair. You can't just shut me out like this. Actually, I could. The apartment was mine. The lease was in my name. He had no legal right to be there. And I'd already changed the locks, a precaution my lawyer had recommended during our first meeting. I'd met Helen Voss on day 4, in her glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of a building in the financial district. Maya had recommended her with 7 words. She protects women's assets. She's ruthless. Helen was in her 60s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had the kind of face that had seen every variation of human betrayal and wasn't impressed by any of it anymore. I'd brought copies of everything: the apartment lease, bank statements, tax returns, the paper trail of financial support I'd provided throughout our marriage. Helen spread the documents across her massive desk and studied them with the focus of a surgeon examining x-rays. "This is unusual," she said, after several minutes of silence. "Usually I'm helping women prove their non-financial contributions, childcare, household management, emotional labor, trying to argue that those things have value even if they don't show up in a bank account." She looked up at me. "You're in the opposite position. You've been the breadwinner and he doesn't even know it." "He knows now," I said. "I told him the morning he was leaving." "How did he react?" "Shock? Disbelief? He accused me of lying at first." Helen nodded, unsurprised. "They usually do. Men like your husband build their identity around being providers. When that narrative collapses, they don't handle it well." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "California is a community property state. Anything acquired during the marriage is presumed to be jointly owned, but there are exceptions." She walked me through the specifics. The apartment was mine. Acquired before marriage, lease never changed. That was separate property. My business was trickier. Maya and I had started it during my marriage, which meant Emmett could potentially claim a portion of its value. But, Helen said, tapping her pen against the pad, if you can demonstrate that you built the business with your own labor and capital, and that he made no contributions to its success, you have a strong argument for keeping it separate. Do you have documentation of how you funded the startup costs? Everything came from my personal savings from before we were married. Good. And did he ever contribute financially to the business, invest money, provide loans? No. He didn't even know it existed until 4 days ago. Helen allowed herself a small smile. Even better. What about his career? Did you support him financially while he was building his? I told her about the 2 years of rent payments, the equipment loan, the website design, the professional memberships and networking events. Document all of it, Helen said. Dates, amounts, any written communication about repayment. In California, when one spouse supports the other's education or career development, that can be considered a separate contribution that offsets community property claims. She drew up preliminary separation papers, advised me on asset protection, explained how to separate our bank accounts without triggering suspicion. Are you sure you want to do this? Helen asked as I was leaving. 7 years is a long time. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed or influenced by friends. Sometimes marriage counseling can. 7 years of being invisible is long enough, I said. Helen studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll have the papers ready by early next week. But, Miss Ashford, once you file, there's no putting this back in the box. Make sure this is really what you want. I thought about Emmett's suitcase, about the casual cruelty of being called unremarkable, about 7 years of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. It's what I want, I said. On day 8, I met with Jordan McNulty at a cafe in the Mission. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and 2 coffees waiting. Jordan was in his early 40s, perpetually dressed like he'd just come from a meeting with important people, which he usually had. He'd built his career managing product launches for tech companies, the kind of careful narrative construction that turned software releases into cultural moments. You're finally doing it, he said when I sat down. Going public with what you've built. I explained the situation. The marriage ending, the acquisition closing in less than 2 weeks, the birthday dinner I was planning for Emmett and his friends. Jordan listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like admiration. This is delicate, he said when I finished. We can't make it look like you're announcing the acquisition to humiliate your husband. It has to be about the business, about you and Maya stepping into your power. The personal stuff, the marriage, the birthday dinner, that stays personal. I'm not trying to humiliate him, I said. I'm just done hiding. I know, but the press won't see it that way if we're not careful. They'll make it about revenge, about a bitter wife getting back at her husband. That's not the story we want. He pulled up a draft press release on his laptop. Ashford Chin Crisis Management acquired by Catalyst Ventures. 2 women built an 8-figure company while everyone was looking the other way. We lead with the business achievement, the innovation, the fact that you've been handling some of the biggest tech crises of the last 3 years and nobody knew your names. That's the story. When does it go live? I'm thinking Saturday night, 11 p.m., after your dinner. He glanced at me. That gives you your moment with Emmett and his friends. Then while they're all processing what you told them, the press release hits. By morning, it's everywhere. Tech blogs, business news, LinkedIn. The story becomes about your success, not about your marriage. Can you coordinate with Forbes and TechCrunch? Already have. They're hungry for this story. Secret female founders who built something massive? That's catnip for business press right now. He closed his laptop. But Cora, I need you to understand something. Once you're visible, you can't go back to invisible. People will have opinions about you, about your business, about your marriage. They'll dissect your life on social media. Are you ready for that? I thought about the last 7 years, about introducing myself as Emmett's wife at parties, and watching people's eyes glaze over with disinterest the moment they learned I just did some consulting. About being remarkable in secret because I was afraid of what visibility would cost. I'm ready, I said. On day 14, the morning of Emmett's birthday, I woke at 5 a.m. to an email from Maya with the subject line, "We did it." Wire transfer confirmed. We're rich. 12.7 million just hit your account. Check it. I pulled up my banking app with shaking hands. The number was there. Undeniable. 7 figures followed by more figures than I'd ever seen in my personal account. I waited for euphoria, for tears, for some big cinematic moment of triumph. Instead, I felt calm, clear, like I'd been walking through fog for 7 years, and someone had finally turned on the sun. The money wasn't the point. The point was I'd built something real while everyone was looking the other way. I'd proven to myself, if no one else, that remarkable wasn't something someone else got to decide about you. I got out of bed and walked to my closet, pulled out the midnight blue silk dress I'd bought last week specifically for tonight. Simple cut, expensive fabric, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. I showered, did my makeup, styled my hair. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Present. Done. Disappearing. My phone buzzed. Another text from Emmett. "See you tonight." I smiled at the screen and typed back, 8 p.m., don't be late. I arrived at L'Atelier Rousseau at 7:45, parking in the structure across the street. The evening air was cool, typical for San Francisco in late September, carrying that salt and fog smell from the bay. I walked the 2 blocks to the restaurant, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm that felt like a countdown. The restaurant's exterior was understated, just a brass plaque beside a dark wooden door. The kind of place that didn't need to announce itself because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. I'd walked past it a dozen times with Emmett over the years, watching him slow down each time, his eyes lingering on the couples disappearing through that door, into whatever magic waited inside. "Someday," he'd say, "when I really make it, we'll go there." I'd made the reservation 4 months ago, back when I still thought we meant something. Colette was waiting inside, elegant in black, her French accent still thick despite what I knew was 20 years in San Francisco. She recognized me immediately. We'd spoken on the phone 3 times in the past week, finalizing details. "Miss Ashford," she said, extending her hand. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." "Thank you, Colette." She led me past the main dining room, past tables of well-dressed couples speaking in low voices over wine that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. We went through a corridor lined with black and white photographs of Parisian food markets, then through a door into the semi-private dining room I'd reserved. It was perfect. The table was set for 12, champagne flutes catching the light from Edison bulbs overhead. The menus were already placed. I'd pre-selected the chef's tasting menu, 7 courses, wine pairings with each. In the corner, discreet but visible, was the screen and projector I'd requested, already connected to the restaurant's Wi-Fi network. "The presentation equipment is ready," Colette said. "You'll be able to connect directly from your laptop. And I've briefed the sommelier. Champagne will be poured when you give the signal." I pulled out my laptop and tested the connection. The first slide appeared on the screen, a simple title slide with my company logo. I advanced through the presentation quickly, making sure everything was in order. The acquisition announcement, the financial documentation, the timeline of support. All of it clean, professional, undeniable. "Perfect," I said, disconnecting. "I'll reconnect when I'm ready." "Will you be joining the party immediately, or would you prefer to wait at the bar?" "The bar," I said. "I want to watch them arrive." Colette led me back to the main room and settled me at the far end of the bar, positioned so I could see the entrance and the corridor leading to the private dining room. She placed a glass of sparkling water in front of me without asking. "For clarity," she said quietly. I appreciated her understanding. I needed to be clear tonight, present for every moment of what was about to happen. The first guests arrived at 7:53, Marcus and Devin, Emmett's college roommates, both of them dressed in suits that screamed finance money. Marcus had put on weight since I'd last seen him at a barbecue 2 summers ago. Devin had shaved his head, probably trying to get ahead of the balding that was clearly winning. They looked around with confusion, checking their phones, comparing notes. Through the window, I watched them show each other their text messages, invitations I'd sent from an unknown number, claiming to be from Emmett. Colette greeted them smoothly, confirmed they were here for the Ashford party, and led them to the private dining room. I watched their faces as they passed. Curiosity, uncertainty, the beginning of that social anxiety that comes from not knowing what role you're supposed to play. Harper arrived next, at 7:57. Emmett's colleague from Morrison and Associates. I'd met her exactly 3 times in 7 years, twice at company holiday parties, and once at a dinner celebrating Emmett's promotion. She was the kind of woman who dressed like she was perpetually on her way to an important meeting. Sharp blazer, crisp blouse, heels that added 3 inches, but somehow still looked practical. She greeted Marcus and Devin with the kind of professional warmth that didn't quite reach genuine friendship, and I realized she probably didn't know them well either. We were all supporting players in Emmett's life, kept carefully separated so we never compared notes. At 8 o'clock exactly, Sienna walked in. I'd never met her in person, but I recognized her from the photos Emmett had shown me. Tall, blonde, the kind of pretty that looked expensive to maintain. She was wearing a dress that probably cost what most people spent on rent. Emerald green, fitted, the kind that demanded attention in any room. This was the woman who told Emmett I was unremarkable, the friend whose opinion had mattered more than 7 years of marriage. I watched her greet the others with easy confidence, watched her laugh at something Marcus said, watched her settle into the room like she belonged there, like this was her party, her celebration, her stage. Not for long. Colette offered champagne. Sienna accepted. The others followed suit. They clustered in the private dining room, visible through the glass partition, their body language shifting from confusion to that forced social energy people adopt when they're not sure what's happening but don't want to seem uncool. I checked my phone. 8:02. Emmett was late. Then the door opened, and there he was. He stood in the entrance for a moment, scanning the restaurant, and I watched the confusion bloom across his face when he spotted his friends through the glass. He pulled out his phone, checked it like he might have missed a message explaining what was happening. He was wearing the charcoal suit I'd bought him 18 months ago when he'd made senior design lead, the one I'd had tailored specifically to his measurements at a shop in North Beach that charged $200 just for the alterations. The Italian leather shoes I'd given him last Christmas, the ones he'd worn to every important meeting since then. He looked successful, polished, like a man who had his life figured out. I knew exactly how much of that image I'd funded. His eyes swept the room, searching, and finally landed on me at the bar. I watched him process it. His wife alone, watching him. Something unreadable in her expression. He started walking toward me, his face cycling through emotions. Confusion gave way to hope. Hope tinged with uncertainty. Uncertainty bleeding into the beginning of fear as he registered something in my posture that told him this wasn't going to be the reconciliation he'd convinced himself was coming. "Cora," he said when he reached me. "What's going on? Why are Marcus and Devin here? And Sienna?" "It's your birthday dinner," I said calmly. "I invited the people whose opinions matter most to you." "But I thought you said we should talk. I thought it would be just us." "We will talk," I said. "In front of your friends, the ones who helped you see how unremarkable I am." I stood up, smoothed my dress. "Come on. Everyone's waiting." I started walking toward the private dining room. Behind me, I heard Emmett following, his footsteps hesitant, his breathing slightly elevated. He was starting to understand that something was wrong, that the script he'd written in his head wasn't the one I was about to perform. Colette opened the door to the private dining room. The conversation inside stopped as everyone turned to look at us. I watched Sienna's expression shift from curiosity to something more guarded, watched Marcus and Devin exchange a glance, watched Harper set down her champagne glass with careful precision. "Thank you all for coming," I said, stepping into the room with the authority I usually reserved for boardrooms full of panicking executives. "Please, everyone sit. I wanted to celebrate Emmett's birthday with the people who matter most to him." Emmett entered behind me, still confused, looking between his friends and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. "Cora, what is this?" His voice carried an edge of desperation. "It's exactly what I said. Your birthday dinner." I moved to the head of the table, positioning myself so everyone could see me clearly. "2 weeks ago, you told me your friends think I'm not remarkable enough for you." that you could do better. I thought your friends should be here when you find out exactly how remarkable I've been." I saw the moment it registered, the way his face went pale, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Sienna shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. Devin suddenly became very interested in the menu in front of him. Only Harper looked directly at me, her expression unreadable, like she was watching a play and wasn't sure yet whether it was tragedy or comedy. "Everyone here has champagne except you and me," I said, looking at Emmett. "Should we get glasses? We have so much to celebrate." Colette appeared silently at the door, 2 champagne flutes on a tray. She set them down at the remaining 2 seats, one at the head of the table where I stood, one beside it where Emmett was still frozen. "Please," I gestured to his chair. "Sit. This is your party, after all." He sat slowly, like a man walking into a trap he could see but couldn't avoid. The room was completely silent, except for the soft sound of champagne being poured, bubbles rising in crystal, the anticipation thick enough to taste. I picked up my glass and smiled at the table full of people who'd decided I wasn't worth noticing. "Shall we begin?" The sommelier moved around the table with practiced efficiency, filling 12 champagne flutes with golden liquid that caught the light like promises about to be broken. I stood at the head of the table, perfectly still, watching bubbles rise in crystal while Emmett remained frozen halfway between standing and sitting, his confusion hardening into something closer to dread. When the last glass was filled and the sommelier had retreated through the door, with a discreet nod, I let the silence stretch, let it become uncomfortable, let everyone in that room marinate in their uncertainty for exactly 15 seconds before I spoke. "2 weeks ago," I began, my voice level and clear, "Emmett came home and told me that his friends think I'm not remarkable enough for him, that he could do better." The words landed like grenades. Sienna's face drained of color so fast, I thought she might faint. Marcus suddenly developed an intense interest in the napkin folded on his plate. Devin's jaw tightened. Harper, the only person in the room who looked genuinely surprised rather than guilty, turned to stare at Emmett with an expression I couldn't quite read. "And you know what?" I continued, keeping my tone conversational, almost light. "He was absolutely right." I saw the confusion ripple through the room. This wasn't the script anyone had expected. "I'm not remarkable enough," I said. "I'm remarkable in ways he never bothered to notice, in ways none of you bothered to ask about." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the screen in the corner. The first slide appeared. Clean, professional, undeniable. "This is my company. Ashford Chin Crisis Management." The logo filled the screen. Simple, elegant, professional. For 3 years, while Emmett was collecting his architecture awards and introducing me at parties as his wife who does some freelance consulting, my business partner Maya and I have been running a boutique crisis management firm specializing in tech companies. I advanced to the next slide. A list of services, carefully worded to protect client confidentiality, but specific enough to convey scope. We handle the disasters other consultants won't touch. Data breaches affecting millions of users, PR nightmares involving executive misconduct, corporate scandals that could destroy companies if mishandled. We're discreet, we're effective, and we're very, very expensive. Next slide, client testimonials with names redacted, case studies with identifying details removed, revenue charts showing exponential growth over 3 years. I heard someone inhale sharply. Couldn't tell who. Last year, we billed $4.2 million. This year, we're on track for $6.8 million. 6 months ago, 2 Fortune 500 companies approached us with acquisition offers. I let that information settle, watching faces process numbers that didn't match the narrative they'd constructed about who I was. "This morning," I said, advancing to the next slide, "we finalized the acquisition." The announcement from Catalyst Ventures filled the screen. Official letterhead, legal language, and at the bottom, the number that had made my accountant's hands shake when he'd shown me the wire transfer confirmation. 60% of the company sold to Catalyst Ventures for $21 million. My share, after splitting with my partner and paying out early investors, $12.7 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even breathing sounds. Just 12 people frozen in place, champagne glasses suspended, brains trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of them with the one they dismissed as unremarkable. I let them sit with it, let the number echo in the quiet space. Then I advanced to the next slide. But let me show you something else, because the remarkable thing isn't just what I built, it's what I built while everyone assumed I was building nothing. Bank statements appeared on the screen. My account and our joint account, side by side, showing monthly transfers for the last 18 months. These are the deposits I made to cover our household expenses after Emmett's firm restructured and cut his salary by 30%. He was embarrassed about the pay cut, so I quietly transferred money from my business account to our joint account, enough to cover the shortfall so he wouldn't have to worry. Emmett made a sound, something between a gasp and a groan. I didn't look at him, kept my eyes on the screen, on the evidence that couldn't be argued with. Next slide, rent receipts from 5 and 6 years ago. These are from the 2 years after Emmett finished grad school. While he was interning at architecture firms that paid nothing but promised experience, I paid our rent, both of us, for 24 months. Next slide, a bank transfer for $15,000. This is the loan I gave Emmett for professional camera equipment, high-end gear for architectural photography to make his portfolio stand out. The loan agreement said he'd repay it when he got his first real paycheck. That was 4 years ago. We never discussed it again. I could feel Emmett staring at me, could sense the weight of his gaze, but I kept my focus forward. Next slide. An invoice from a web development company. $8,000 for a professional website redesign. His portfolio site, the one that helped him land his job at Morrison and Associates. Next slide. Another invoice. $3,000 for his membership in the American Institute of Architects, professional development courses, networking events, materials for presentations. Slide after slide, a paper trail of support that had been invisible because I'd never demanded recognition for it. Never mentioned it. Never held it over him. The receipts added up in real time on the screen. Dinners I'd paid for while he was networking, car insurance I'd covered. The 1,000 small expenses that accumulate when you're building a life with someone and one person is quietly carrying more weight than the other realizes. I never thought of this as keeping score, I said quietly. I thought of it as partnership, as love, as the invisible work that holds households together. I finally looked at Emmett. His face was gray, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he needed something solid to hold on to. But looking at these numbers now, I realized what I was actually doing. I was subsidizing your ego, funding the fiction that you were the successful one, the breadwinner, the remarkable husband generous enough to marry someone ordinary. I turned to face the whole table, and all of you helped maintain that fiction, because it was easier to assume I was unremarkable than to ask what I actually did. Easier to judge me for not having an impressive job title than to wonder if maybe I was building something you couldn't see. Sienna was crying silently, tears running down her face unchecked. Marcus had his head in his hands. Devin was staring at the table like he wanted it to swallow him. Harper was still looking at Emmett with that unreadable expression, something between disappointment and disgust. The apartment we live in, I continued, the lease is in my name, has been since before we married. Emmett moved in with me, not the other way around. The furniture, the art, the car he drives. I bought all of it, not because I was keeping score, but because I had the money, and he had student loans he was paying down. I disconnected my phone from the screen. The slides disappeared, leaving just a blank white rectangle that somehow felt louder than the images had been. I kept all of this quiet because I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought being remarkable meant being invisible. I thought love meant making myself smaller so my partner could feel bigger. I picked up my champagne glass. The weight of it felt significant, ceremonial. I was wrong about all of that. And Emmett, you were wrong too. Not about me being unremarkable. You were wrong about what remarkable looks like. I raised the glass, watching the light catch in the liquid, creating tiny prisms that scattered across the white tablecloth. I paid for this dinner, every course, every wine pairing, Every moment of this evening, consider it a birthday gift and a severance package. You all get to enjoy a $400 per person tasting menu, courtesy of the unremarkable wife who apparently wasn't worth keeping. I looked at each of them in turn. Sienna with her tears, Marcus with his shame, Devin with his silence, Harper with her judgment, and finally Emmett, who looked like a man watching his entire self-concept collapse in real time. To finding better, I said, my voice steady, clear, final. May you all eventually learn the difference between what's remarkable and what's just visible. I drank. The champagne was excellent, crisp, complex, expensive. Everything this moment required. I set down the glass with a soft clink that somehow sounded like an ending. Then I walked out of L'Atelier Rousseau into the cool San Francisco night, leaving behind the birthday dinner, the marriage, and the life I'd built around people who'd never bothered to look closely enough to see me. Behind me, through the glass, I heard the explosion of voices, shock and anger and confusion all colliding at once, but I didn't look back. I'd said everything that needed saying. The rest was just noise.